Lunch and Learn webinar series. My name is Erin Hollis, Associate Director of the Alumni Outreach here at the MIT Alumni Association. Today's topic is sustaining a successful career in technology. We have a fantastic lineup of MIT alumni eager to share their thoughts on this topic. But first, a few housekeeping items. Our webinar today is being broadcast live. I encourage viewers to submit their questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. For all our listeners joining via YouTube, you may add your questions to the comments field. You can also tweet your comments and questions using hashtag #MITBetterWorld. The recorded version of this webinar will be available 1 week from today on our YouTube channel. Before I turn things over to our moderator, I want to take this opportunity to mention that we are once again hosting the MIT Women's Conference on March 9th and 10th here in Cambridge. Please save the date, and for more information, you may contact alumsigs@mit.edu. Okay, it is my great pleasure to turn over today's program to our moderator, Chris Dolan. Chris, we're honored to have you here today with us. If you could kick things off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your involvement with MIT, and why this topic is so important to you. Thanks, Chris. Chris, if you could just unmute your mic.
My audio. Can you hear me now?
We're great.
I'm an alum. I'm a graduate of the MIT Media Lab, and I'm also an electrical engineer and computer scientist, and spent my entire career in technology. And so this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I founded Dream It, Code It, Win It under the encouragement of the alumni office and some of the folks in the MIT CAC, just to be able to encourage students and people of all types to participate in computer science. And so it was an interesting journey for me because one of the things that I realized is that women tend to engage in computer science when it's about problem solving and do really well in it. But I also learned a little bit about, the numbers, and it's unfortunate, but there's less and less women that are that are engaged in computer science. In terms of my background and my career, when I finished at the Media Lab, it was around the time of the web. And so I was on the founding teams at Hearst and Disney, went on to do a company, co-founded a company which we took public and was fairly successful. And just recently, I launched a company called Insurix, which we renamed as IX Ledger, which had a very successful token offering, which I'm sure you've heard about. And so I've spent my entire career in the tech space. I am currently the vice chair and former chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum and the former president of the MIT Club of New York. And so with that, I'd love to get started. We have a wonderful panel, and I would like to ask our panelists if they would take a few minutes and introduce themselves and kind of why this topic is important to them. So let's start with Helen Ma. You unmuted yourself?
Hi, Christina. Great to see you. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so honored to be part of this panel. This topic is near and dear to my heart as well. I've been in tech for over a decade, and I really see my career across several chapters. The first chapter of my career was as an electrical engineering as well. I used to work for the Boeing company, building and launching communication satellites for the Department of Defense, as well as for commercial customers. And that first chapter of my career as a young woman in tech was really about learning what it is to be an engineer and how to create the skills as well as the credibility to be an engineer in that environment. The second chapter of my career, I went to business school after I got my master's in electrical engineering from Michigan and USC. And business school really taught me the other side of technology. How do we actually build a business and bring products to scale and market it and make it successful? And I worked for McKinsey for about 3.5 years and left as a senior engagement manager And now my role is sort of that third chapter, which is really a bridge across both the technical piece as well as the business piece. So I lead global video solutions as well as new advertising formats here at Facebook. And what I love now is that I get to work every day with product and engineering folks to really understand the best products that we can build to deliver value for advertisers, but then also to take it from that early stage product development to testing and launch to ultimately create really great products to deliver value for partners and clients for Facebook. You know, I grew up in a family of engineers, and I kind of see it in my blood. And I've always been really passionate about encouraging more women as well as underrepresented minorities to pursue this field.
It sounds exciting. Looking forward to hearing your comments with that very diverse engineering background, both from the digital and concrete communication systems. Next, let's move on to Raul. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and so why this topic's important to you?
Sure. My name is Rahul Bhargav. I'm right now a research scientist at the Media Lab at MIT, actually. My background is in education and robotics. I've done a lot of museum exhibit design. I've done firmware writing and software. I've done robotics and hardware building. I like to talk about myself as a recovering computer scientist, mostly because my computer science education didn't really help me understand the context in which computer science operates in the world. And that created in me a passion to go do education work. And that focused me down on inclusion and empowerment as two things I care a lot about. And I care about that on multiple axes. And I try to position a lot of my work around that and go out and talk to other students about how technology can be used as a tool to create inclusion and empowerment. So I do that now at a center called the Center for Civic Media, where we work on technology and social change. So how it can get in the way and how it can help. And the hardest thing we do is the social use of technology, not the building of technology. So that theme underlies a lot of my work, and I've been lucky enough to sort of be able to think through some of these problems that exist not only in the field of technology, but also in how it's used more broadly. So I'm passionate about how to drive that forward and how to get better at it, not just so I'm prouder of saying that I work in technology and I don't cringe sort of when I say that in certain audiences, but also so that it's a force for good in the world.
Well, that's great. And it's great to have a man's perspective on this panel as well. So looking forward to your comments during our discussion. And Tamara Johnson, it would be great if you could give us a little bit about your background and why this is a topic that you're passionate about.
Sure. So I went to MIT undergrad, course 16. So I spent my first 10 years of my career in aerospace engineering. Went and got a master's degree and also an MBA towards the end of that time period. And then went off and started a company providing broadband access in rural America. And then the last couple of years have been doing a company providing on-demand brain power for business and primarily using MIT mid-career women to do that work. So it's something that I care about a lot in dealing with every day. You know, how can we better keep women in the workforce and better take advantage of their experiences? Probably kind of similar to Helen, I went through my career, and at first I was just wanting there to be more women in science and engineering, and then I started to realize it's not just a problem there; it's a problem across a lot of different aspects of business. And so that was part of the reason for starting the company that I did, and excited to get to talk about this with other MIT folks today.
Well, thank you so much. We're starting to get some questions. First, I just wanted to kind of cover the sort of a little bit about the journey, and then we're going to get to some of these questions, because for anyone who's interested in asking questions, please don't hesitate, because we will get to them. But I think when we were preparing for this talk, one of the things that we talked about was the drop-off points for women and that journey. And I think that one of the things that's really kind of disappointing is that the numbers of graduates have gone down. So I think one of the things that might be interesting is just to sort of touch on sort of where did your journeys begin and what got you excited early on? Helen?
Sure. I can take that. So Christina, you're absolutely right. And actually pulled up the stats to kind of give folks an idea of what we're up against. The journey has to start young. That's always been my sense. And I think everybody agrees that the problem is, it is a pipeline issue. By the time they actually graduate and they're qualified to become a computer scientist or engineer, there's too few of them. The statistics today say that by 2020, we're going to have 1 million more computer science and engineering jobs, and there are qualified people to fill it. And unfortunately for women, especially, the numbers are even worse. So in 2014, women earned 19% of engineering and 18% of computer science bachelor's degrees. 30 years ago, that number was double for computer science. Nearly 37% of graduates were women. And so we're actually no longer maintaining, we're declining our share. And meanwhile, more and more of these jobs are out there and less people to fill it. And so to me, we have to start young and we have to start early. What got me personally excited, as I alluded to, was first, I think culturally, we don't see this in other parts of the world. I grew up in China, and myself, as well as colleagues that I've worked with from other countries like India and Brazil, this problem is not an issue. Females don't have this feeling that they shouldn't be in science and technology. In fact, everyone is encouraged by their country and their families to go into that field. So I think we need to have we need more role models, and we need to have a better positioning of computer science, not just as a man's job, but something that women can equally do and do well. We know that in some of the research that I did when I was at McKinsey, in partnership with Facebook, we found that a lot of this is also a confidence gap that women have here in this country. We know that there are women tend to feel like they're not good enough for this, or if they see men doing this, they say, well, maybe this is not for me. And we actually hear this throughout their journey, and therefore we see them systematically dropping off over time. So I think having a really strong network, and that network doesn't have to be just women, it could be women and men, to help them through that journey, to get them from discovery to trying it, to actually wanting to take a class, to taking that class, to graduating and becoming a successful computer scientist and engineer is really important. And I think for me, my dad was an electrical engineer. My aunt was a computer scientist. My other aunt was a PhD in chemical engineering. They were the role models for me to say, hey, you can do this. It actually kind of is in your blood. And there were times where I said, well, I don't know if I'm cut out for this, or if I think I want to be this, but the others in my class and my family members, my twin brother, they all helped me through to say, you can do this. And in fact, you can be really good at it.
Thanks. And just to add to those statistics, I think in the last couple of years, the numbers still haven't gone up. They've continued to go down, which is kind of disheartening. Tamara, we talked a little bit about, your early, your career in engineering. So, engineering's hard, and some of the women who are attracted to engineering then drop out when they're in school. So what are your thoughts on that? Because you stuck it out.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely engineering's hard. Different engineering majors, like Course 16 has a reputation to be one of the harder ones, right? And I think when I was there, it was probably a third female. I mean, for getting in the first place, definitely seeing someone else, whether it's engineer or somebody doing technical, and then being supported if you're naturally a technical person is important kind of all throughout childhood. I think for women specifically, knowing that what they're solving and doing has a bigger context, that there's something more to it than just I'm solving these interesting math problems, but I can then apply it to do something specific in the world, makes a big difference for kind of sticking with it and realizing what you can end up doing. Harvey Mudd, they've been known in the last couple of years for getting up to 50% female in their engineering when they had been, say, 20% or something like that, specifically in computer science. And I think a large part of what they did was literally show the real world what you can do with this, as well as, not being afraid to ask questions, not thinking you have to be 100% right from the start. I think that tends to be another female tendency, that I don't want to speak up, or until I'm really confident of this, I'm not sure I've got it. And realizing you may not get it right from the get-go is important in your early stages of being an engineer, and then when you're actually out there, in the real world working in the industry.
So we have a bunch of questions coming in, and I think next what I wanted to talk a little bit about was the career journey, because I think that that's another phase at which women drop out. And one of our questions from Angelina Clark asks, how does one overcome a glass floor? And any thoughts on that? Is it glass floor or glass ceiling? Yeah. Glass floor. Says here, great title, but having to fight for budget, peer respect, and every new team member to execute the plans we're developing.
Yeah, I think what Angela's talking about there, the glass floor as opposed to ceiling, means it's like your first real job where you're getting a title like you're supposed to be an authority, except nobody's treating you with authority. And then that, I believe, tends to be, if you're a female, that you may be seeing more of that in a more male-dominated workplace. I was literally talking to my sister about a similar thing yesterday in her workplace, and a male peer that basically isn't believing what she's saying when she's bringing things up, and then it's then finally the boss says it, and then okay, he believes what she's saying. It's tricky. I was telling her, you have to be careful to make note of it, but at the same time not be raising an issue so much that people think that you're just trying to cause problems, because it's kind of a delicate balance between making sure that your words are getting out there and that you're getting respected, while at the same time everybody not looking at you like you're just trying to cause issues or you can't just get your job done. So yeah, my advice to her was make note of what's going on, kind of pick your battles a little bit. And then for the things that are truly important, do call them out, even if it ends up, that the person's not happy with you because it seems like you're questioning, their opinions and their authority.
I think that the other piece on that is that everybody wants to be on a successful team, and focusing on the objectives and making things less personal sometimes helps get everybody lined up under, behind an idea when communicating. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but sometimes the frustration makes us focus less on the journey and more on the frustration, but that's not always the case. But Helen, you were just going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to add, I can very much identify with some of this. When I first started at Boeing, I was 21 years old, and I was probably the only woman. Actually, I was the only woman in a department of 500 engineers. I think the only other women were executive assistants on the floor. And I definitely got the sense. I mean, of course, early on in my career, it was about proving my credibility. And then as I took on leadership roles, it was still, how do I establish the fact that I'm not just being promoted because I'm a woman, but I'm being promoted because I actually know what I'm doing and I can add value. And I think for me, it's the focus on impact, and it's also finding allies within the organization that you work in. So, we can let this get into our heads and we can feel down. But what I find is that if you're really doing the work and you're making real impact, find areas where you can immediately make an impact and show people, hey, this person knows what they're doing and actually they're helping the cause. I think the second is finding allies within the organization. This is definitely oversimplifying, but I found that there were some men who didn't see me as a woman. They just saw me as another engineer and said, okay, I need to work with her and figure out how we get things done. And then there were others who were a little bit more skeptical, or sometimes, older men kind of saw me as their daughter. And I wasn't at that even level playing field with them. But what I did was I said, well, let's find the allies in the company. Let's find people who see me as a peer and I can actually work with, and we can do something together in a positive way and show that impact to senior leadership around the organization. And that was just a win-win. And then when those people become your allies, they will then help with your credibility with others around the organizations to say, hey, give this person a chance. They know what they're doing and they can really bring value.
So it's interesting. So we have like 3 questions around sort of the boys club, male dominated office. Rahul, would you like to take that one? Most of the people are asking, how do you deal with this sort of male dominated old boys club kind of an environment and succeed? I mean, there's 3 questions on it, so I'm sort of trying to combine them all.
Yeah.
But since
I'm happy to speak to it from sort of, the side of trying to be an ally. So in settings where that's the case, you can either work on it from above if you're in the management, or you can work on it as sort of a peer of someone being part of it. If you're a male, it sort of has the keys to the club, essentially, is allowed through the door, just because of the way you look. So if you're working on it from above, it's about setting like either like performance-based norms or workplace norms, right? It's you treat it as you treat it as an engineering problem, right? There's this problem in the way that the office is functioning, and you need to increase the efficiency of the office, because like having those clubs is actually quite detrimental to the business culture and actually getting done what you're trying to get done. So there's a language around trying to do that, and there's always resistance, and that becomes very difficult. So I've seen places where people have just played the waiting game and aged out of it. Unfortunately, those cultures are very good at inculcating themselves and reproducing themselves over time. So there's some like very obvious low-hanging fruit that in places like San Francisco are shocking, but in everywhere else that's normal, people are like, yes, you're right. There should be norms that are like, it's not okay to take a nap in the breastfeeding room. Like that is just not, there's like no reason that should be okay. Why is this even a question? That is not an okay thing. And then, so if you're working on it from within it, it's about not being a bystander, right? Like when you see that happen, when you see things happen, take a voice, use that voice. If you're like me and you have the keys to that club, it's your responsibility to use them responsibly. So being a bystander is not a solution anymore if you actually care about this.
But I think that one of the issues with that, though, is that when you're in the workplace, you want to be rewarded for doing your job and not being the spokesperson for, how people behave or being the police. So how do you do it subtly so that it becomes part of the organization without becoming part of your brand and overshadowing the work and contributions you make? Because people can think you're in, some people who feel like they're being scolded might not appreciate your good work.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Helen and Tamra probably have better sort of experiences from your life about this. I can only speak to situations that I've seen and some of the trainings that exist for not being a bystander anymore. There's simple strategies. For instance, there's one that's when something is so outrageous, you turn it into a joke saying you couldn't have possibly meant that. All right. So to sort of make it an embarrassing situation for the person that tried to make that rude comment, such that they wouldn't like believe it's rude anymore.
That's actually a good one. I like that.
And this is like something you can do from above, is you can bring in people to do those bystander trainings, which, in the culture we're in right now, where sort of hate is on the rise and there's more and more like violence happening around, it's like these are important strategies to teach in workplaces. And also, just the last bit to add in is that I push back quite significantly on this idea that work is somehow separate from the rest of you as a human. It's just a silly idea, and it leads to terrible, unethical behaviors, right? Like you don't check your morals at the door when you go to the office. I mean, that's a stupid idea. Like it makes no sense. So I see a deeper underlying reason that I think needs to be worked on. But as I said, I think Helen and Tamra probably might have experiences on what they've seen around them and how people fight against this.
Yeah, I mean, I see a number of questions coming in around this topic, so it's probably worth it to get your thoughts on that, Tamra and Helen. You both worked in all male environments. I guess that comes with the territory in tech. You sort of become used to it. But what suggestions do you have?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the case, I guess, until the last couple of years with Flex Team when I'm working with a bunch of women. But before that, it was always male dominated. Sometimes you could use it to your advantage because you stood out, you were the one woman in the room. And so they actually would remember you and remember your ideas. And so I think at points in my career, if you made a comment, they were likely to know who made it, that type of thing. And so take advantage of that aspect of it. The more subtle things, I think the older I've gotten, the more willing I've been to kind of point them out. But it is, like I had said on the other thing with my sister, you pick your battles a little bit. Because you don't always want to be, kind of like you were saying, Chris, you don't always want to be the one that, oh, here she goes again, right? Bringing the things up that everybody else is like, oh, she's just, complaining about things again. I think one-on-one conversation, it can be a lot easier, especially on the, when people don't realize the things that they're doing or the way that they're acting on some things that are are impactful and coming from a gender point of view. And then to add a little bit to what Rahul was saying on the, bringing your whole self to work. When I was in aerospace, there were women that were in middle management and a few vice presidents, but it was, you didn't know they had kids. And some of them did, but it was a very separate, like, that's my outside life, that is not my work life. And at the time I left the aerospace industry, that was one of my reasons, was that I didn't want there to be this total separation between who I was at work and who I was outside of work. And so I think that's important, not just for women, but men as well to, we are more than who we are when we're in the workplace and when we're interacting with others on work things.
Yeah, I can add a couple of my tidbits and what I've done over the course of my career as well. I love this notion of turning what could be perceived or is perceived as a negative into a positive. So I love that Tamara said, being a woman is not a bad thing. In fact, you're a minority, but you're a memorable minority. I also found that actually in those male-dominant environments, a lot of men crave the attention of women and they like being around women. And so use that to your advantage. I remember when I was very young, there was an engineer who was always in demand, and he had, he's just very hard to get on the phone or get in a meeting, but he loved interacting with me, and it helped that I, could get time with him. And I think part of it was that he, wasn't used to working with females, but he liked having a different perspective, someone that brought a fresh perspective, someone that wasn't like everybody else he had worked with for the past 30 years. So see it as a positive, use it as a positive. You may be different, but you bring a different perspective, you see things differently. And so I think that's one thing. I think the second is that oftentimes the reason why someone acts the way they do is there's more underneath. Sort of that iceberg theory. Take the time to get to know someone. I know it's hard, especially someone who may be treating you not the way you want to, but what I've found is when you actually have the tough conversations, go have dinner with them, go have lunch, go grab a drink. People really let their guards down, and you realize that oftentimes it's driven by their own insecurity and not because of their perception of you or who you are. And so getting to know them, understanding why they think the way they do, building trust and credibility, and kind of meeting it head on, I think is important. And then the last part is, I will say, if you are truly in a toxic environment, don't stick around. There is really no need. I think somebody said, have you guys always stuck it out? And I would say no. The number one advice I got from one of my first managers early on in my career is, he said, work with good people, work with people that you love working with, that foster a culture and an environment that you enjoy. Because at the end of the day, you may work on really interesting technologies, but if your everyday experience is crap, you're going to be miserable. And so he always said, optimize for the people. You'll never go wrong there. So I think that it's really important to find the culture that works for you. There's the broader company culture, but obviously every team is different. So find that chemistry, find that fit, and I think that that has gone a long ways for me personally.
You make some really great points. I mean, I worked in the fintech space, which a lot of women call like a daily micro hazing. And Rahul, it's too bad that your presence cannot be in a lot more of those firms to help sort of create that kind of environment. But I think that everybody's made some great points. Now, since I want to make sure that we have time for pivots, because we have a number of questions around that. And I think we have Tamara and Helen, you both have good stories around pivots. So because we have a lot of great questions, why don't we try to sort of bring them together? I mean, we have some questions about pivoting into technology, from other, from science, for example. So there's a number of questions around pivoting. So I thought what we could do is, and sort of, because of the time here, I thought it might be good for us to talk about not just pivoting from one career to another, but also pivoting from different types of work, like because of, a family or whatever decisions you're making in your personal life. I mean, work doesn't have to look one way. And so it's about, what does success look like? So Tamara, would you like to get started with that first?
Sure. Yeah. So on the pivot question, and yeah, folks are asking about, getting into tech from a different background or maybe something that hasn't been conventional before. I would say if you're able to take, what your background has been and find something that's kind of a step to the side related to it, but still in the tech industry. So say you have background in one field of science and there's a company that's working on a product related to that use that as your in, so you're not coming to something totally without any background at all, but allow yourself to kind of get entry into a company that's more tech focused, and then from there you can end up figuring out if you want to be a product manager or do something that's more traditional tech, I guess, within the setting of that company. Would be my recommendation. The more general, what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to have a career? Over the last 5 or 10 years, I think there's a big movement to more of project-based work. Your career, for sure, in the last couple decades, it's not you go to one place and work forever. People move around much more quickly, and you're really more a representation of the individual projects and work you've done as opposed to specific roles that you have in a company. And I think that actually plays to the advantage of women and kind of the roles they find themselves in life, especially mid-career time period when you may have children and or you have responsibilities with your parents and a lot of other things outside of just, the normal job. And so I think the more that people get used to working in that way, that it's more about the value you produce and not the time that you're sitting at a desk, that really can, I think, work toward the advantage of women who have a background in tech, strong problem solving skills. Those are all things that make it easier, I think, to basically sell yourself as a service and end up doing project-based work and not just be in a traditional role, giving yourself the flexibility that you need to do other things as well.
And so, you started a firm in this area. So how do women, because we have a couple questions about, confidence, and I guess we want to talk a little bit about the imposter syndrome, but how do women get the skills to sort of pivot into these project-based roles? Because a lot of them require very specific, new, rarer skills that you constantly have to acquire on your own. And then you have to negotiate, right? You have to negotiate for these contracts. So what advice would you give to women who want to go in this direction? Because there's a couple of things in that career decision that are somewhat different from a traditional job, and that you have to negotiate, you have the skills to manage your time. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I guess to say a little bit, in part of my company, Flex Team, we're providing that support, providing that community and environment to help make some of that easier. I would say more generally, kind of like anything, you have to take that first step and just start the process, and it can be scary and it can be challenging when you haven't done it before. Working with others that may already be doing it, seeing if you can help somebody else that already is working as an independent contractor to support them on their contracts, I think is a great place to start. It definitely is one of those, you get work from the work you've done in the past. And so recognize, I would say too, if you're getting to this point, you've been working 5, 10, 15 years, even more, who in your past work world can you tap into, and don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's something that often women, you want to do it on your own. I'm too proud to ask for something. Just say, hey, I'm starting to, doing this work. Do you need any contract support, or do you have any recommendations? People don't think that they are going out of their way doing you a favor in that type of thing. And people would be happy to work with somebody they've worked with before. But you have to put it out there that you're doing it, right? That's how you're going about getting work, and not just in a normal job anymore.
Well, thanks. And so I wanted to pivot a little bit to Helen, sort of similar but different question, because you've pivoted in your career. You've gone from hardcore, technical, and now you're sort of on the product side, also using your technology background, but you've had a career pivot. You've gone from hardcore technologies into a digital world and a business role. And then if you could talk a little bit too about mentors versus sponsors, and also the education along the way that allowed you, what were those things that enabled you to pivot? Because we have some questions on where do you learn? What are the learning avenues, to get these types of skills?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I have a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. I have a bachelor's as well as a master's. But I think the thing that I want to help to convey is that you don't necessarily need a degree these days to actually become a great computer scientist or even engineer in the market. That is kind of the old way that things are done. And yes, for your first job, that, you know, where you graduated and your GPA matters. But after that, it kind of doesn't anymore. And so, especially here in the Valley, you know, we have these nano degrees and boot camps. You learn to code. People are doing that, and people are either becoming independent contractors, like Tamara said, or even then getting a full-time job as a result of gaining those skill sets in the middle of their career, or not having done that at all. So I want to make it very clear that is, you know, it's no longer necessary or even sufficient. There is this continuous learning that is happening and is continuing to happen. I think what's helped me in terms of making some of the shifts in my career is I think business school was a turning point for me. So went to MIT Sloan for my business degree, my MBA. And, you know, when I went, it was more that I wanted to see what was out there. And I think what helped me was that the MBA really opened the doors to not just being an engineer, but so many different industries and functions that I could now be a part of as a result of having this. And so I think the value of the MBA is still there. And, you know, building a network, I think that is also really important. If I think about the jobs that I've had and the opportunities that I've had over the last 5 years or so since I've graduated, so much of that has come from my network, from my MBA, some of them from my undergrad and grad degrees as well. So I think if you're looking to make a real shift in your career, going from technical to non-technical, going to different industries, consider an MBA. And then on your question of mentors and sponsors, I think this is such an important topic, and one that is for women. You know, if I think about the mentors and sponsors that I've had, they've been both men and women. So it doesn't mean that you have to only find women like you and they're the ones who can help you. It's anyone that you happen upon in your career that can be someone that you can learn from. And so the way that I define it, at least, is a mentor is someone who helps to give you advice. They're a sounding board. They could be someone who works with you. They could be someone who's more senior. They could be someone who's more junior, but have expertise in an area that you're trying to build. They really could be anyone. Whereas a sponsor is quite different. That's someone who can actually pound the table for you, who typically has some level of influence, whether it's within your company to help, put you into that next senior role, or have some influence within the broader community or network that can help connect you to the right opportunities for the future. And it's important to have both. And their roles are different at different stages of your career. I think that sometimes, when I see these mentoring programs at companies, I think they're great. The thing is, you have to take those with a grain of salt. They're a great way to try to find people, but at the end of the day, it's about the chemistry you have with that person. You can't really force that relationship. And so, mentors can come at any stage of your career, at different parts of your life. So do sponsors, but you really have to find people that both of you can get a sense for each other, see, feel that there is a mutual understanding and learning that can be had between the two of you. It's not really it's a very organic thing that happens. And so I definitely encourage women to think very thoughtfully and actively about having both mentors and sponsors in their lives.
So Rahul, I see you've been nodding a bit here. I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of how to help organizations create that structure, because one of the things that one of the things that we talked about when we were planning for this is the fact that a lot of women drop off, during certain points during their career. And so, creating that kind of structure, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I actually, because I do education and sort of study education, I go back even earlier. This stuff starts really, really early. And we have, one of my big realizations was learning that like women have been like very deliberately erased from the history of computer science, right? Like I was in my late 20s before I was taught by somebody that women were the first programmers. Late 20s. That's insane. Right? I mean, that's a failure of the system that educates computer scientists at so many levels. At so many levels. And now we have really good champions like Megan Smith, the former CTO, who's doing great work on that problem. And we have examples like what's her first name? Hamilton, Margaret Hamilton, who got the congressional, the Medal of Honor for her work on getting people to the moon. So now we have wonderful examples, and we've also sort of in the groups. I did my master's at the Lifelong Kindergarten group at the Media Lab, who has focused really well on building what Mitchell Resnick likes to talk about as many paths for many learners, right? The abilities, the tools that introduce programming to learn in ways that are open to lots of different styles of learning, which helps not just women, but lots of people that struggle in traditional former learning settings, right? They have Scratch where you can go and be creative and do it with programming. But it's a deeper underlying idea that, and we should build technologies like we should, if we're teaching people to use electronics, we could do it with circuit boards or we could do it with fabric and tape, right? And these appeal to different learners. So it starts all the way back there, and that's about setting a culture and norms and symbols. And I think those perpetuate all the way into business environments. So if businesses want to try to figure out how to model better behavior and change culture, they got to go back to those same underlying strategies, right? So if you're at a at a tech startup and your outing is going to a shooting range, maybe that isn't the most appealing to a wide diversity of people. Maybe you should have multiple options, or maybe you should find something that is less specific, something that's more fun to lots of people, like maybe taking a dinner cruise on the river, right? Like that's just like a different thing. Also fun, you feel treated, but doesn't carry the same cultural baggage. So I think it's a common thread.
So now we have a question here from one of our viewers. It says how you establish work-life balance. And I think this is an important one. I mean, I know I have kids, and in the fintech world, I don't talk a lot about it because I'm just trying to be measured for my ability to get work done. But I'd be interesting, Tamara. I mean, obviously your company is addressing a bit of that.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, for me personally, and it wasn't. I mean, I could have stayed in the aerospace industry and it could have been fine. I could have worked a 40-hour week and had time for my family and whatnot. But knowing myself, I'm a pretty type A driven, like to get things done person. So I wanted to have more control in my schedule and where I was putting my time. And so the answer for me was, leaving a traditional job and starting companies on my own. It means, I don't know if balance is the answer, meaning that it means I get stuff done when I get stuff done. I mean, that's true for a lot of people now, right? With, you bring work home with you, but it's, to have time in the afternoon to bring my son to preschool means maybe last night at 10 o'clock, I was doing some stuff, but that's my choice, right? So personally, the work-life balance, it comes in getting to make the calls on managing both in my family life as well as my professional life. And I am thankful that I am able to do that, but it did mean taking the risk, kind of leaving a normal job and going out and doing something on my own. So that's for me, myself. And then, in the company that we're building, wanting to make that for others as well. I think there's no reason, especially, MIT trained women, there's no reason that each of them couldn't go do that if that's what they wanted to do, meaning go, have their own company, their own consulting firm, either themselves, a small group of people. They've got the smarts, got the intelligence to do it, know how to solve problems. And if that allows them to have the balance they're looking for, I think that's great.
I can speak to that as well. So when my Boeing days, the hours weren't as bad, but in consulting, when I was at McKinsey and Company, those types of environments are notorious for very long hours and working weekends and lots of travel. And here at Facebook, the pace is still frenetic. But I think there's a couple of things that I've tried to do to really balance it. I love what Raul said, which is this line, there kind of isn't a line of work versus life. It is really this integrated 24 hours a day of, lots of different things happening all at once. And so I think that one, it's just recognizing that and understanding that you need to figure out the best ways to optimize all the time that you have in your day across both personal and professional needs and constraints. The number one thing that I've always tried to do is just go for ruthless efficiency and prioritization. So I always ask the question, does it have to be done today? Or can it wait tomorrow? And I think sometimes, we feel like, oh God, we have like 100 things we do. We got to do it all. And the reality is like, maybe there's a handful of those that are really pressing and you do need to do them, but the rest of them you can punt and you're okay. So I think being really ruthless in terms of prioritizing and then also being efficient about it. So, hey, maybe I can't get it all done, but let's do half of it, or let's start something and then I can come back. The second is to set clear boundaries. I think especially as women and when you're newer and starting out in your career, you're afraid to set boundaries. You're like, oh, I'm not, like I got to prove myself and I can't do that. It's so important to do that because otherwise, the work world can be ruthless in its own way. And if you're going to give, they're going to take. And so I think what it's helped for me is that, when I was in my McKinsey days, we always had these team learnings where we made very clear what are our life goals and what are our personal goals and our professional goals and what are our must-haves or like, sort of our boundaries that we want to set. And so for some people it was, I want to be able to work out at least 3 times a week. For others, it was, I don't want to do any work on the weekends. Others is, I want to make it home by 6 p.m. to have dinner with my wife and my kids. And it's totally fine to have open and transparent. And I would say we should encourage these open and transparent discussions so that everybody is on the same page of what is your boundary. It doesn't mean you're not going to be available. It just means these are things that I'd like to prioritize as part of the work. I think the third thing is to trust yourself. And this was a lesson that I learned early on. Sometimes we tend to underestimate our own abilities. And I remember when I first started, I was an associate at McKinsey, and the partner said, hey, she emailed me at Friday afternoon pretty late and said, we need to do a bunch of stuff. And she said, but don't do it this weekend, do it first thing in the morning on Monday. And she said, I want to say again, don't blow up your weekend, do this on Monday. And then of course I started to second guess myself and I said, oh my goodness, like this is my first, big role. What if I mess it up? What if I don't have time and I can't finish it and when she wants? Maybe I should work this weekend. And I stopped myself and I said, you know what? Let's just not worry about it. Let's do it first thing like she said. And that's what I did. And guess what? It was fine. And I actually feel like that one, just like going against my instincts, prove to myself that I don't need to work incessantly. I can do a lot more than I think. I can be a lot more efficient than I think. So that's my third one. And then the last point I would say is delegate. We tend to want to do everything, and there's nothing wrong with delegation. And in fact, it builds camaraderie and bring people together. So to the extent that you can delegate stuff, give it to other people to do that. It'll just make your life easier.
That's a good point. There's a couple of questions here from people with from kids, and my heart goes out to you because you can't really quite delegate that when you have a deadline there. So I don't want to be insensitive to that.
Can I chime in? Can I chime in there?
Yeah.
So this is another one where I think men are in a really great position to change the norms. I work 4 days a week. The 2 afternoons I don't work. I go pick up my kids and take care of them. I was consulting at the time of our first child, and because I work in technology, I made enough money that I just took 3 months off. These are things that we can just do as men, and that changes the norms for everybody. We can join efforts to change the norms around maternity, paternity leave, and as I mentioned earlier, a great pointer is to point at my colleagues Catherine D'Ignazio and Alexis Hope. Ran 3 years ago the breast pump hackathon at MIT, and they're running another one. And this one next year is focused on policy as much as technology. It has the best title of a hackathon ever. Make the breast pump not suck. Wonderful. So there are ways that men and environments can try to work on these infrastructure problems that benefit themselves and other places.
That's a good point. I mean, we just had a question there about flex team because I think, I mean, I was listening to Tamara. I have a lot of respect for what you've done, and I've just founded a new company, and my team is over in Europe. And I literally get up at like 3 o'clock to check my messages, and you know, it's probably like 9 o'clock over there right now, and they're still sending me messages. So I don't know if I would say going off on your own and having to around the clock is necessarily going to help you have more time or more flexibility, because you know, the anxiety of you know, making everything happen in a certain timeline can be quite stressful. But
yeah, I mean, I get to that point, you do have to and I don't know, maybe this is you can't be stressing out about it all the time, or you're just going to be stressed all the time. So there's a little bit of you go to bed and it's okay, and you reset and get up in the morning and, you know, pick up again. I mean, the kind of like you're talking about, the asynchronous communications is a big part of it too. And part of how I think it can work now, you know, that it doesn't matter physically where you are. It's just bringing the right people together to work on the right problems. And so, yeah, those, I think they're all exciting reasons that we're able to do the type of work that we do. But it's true, you can't sit there and be worrying about it all the time, or you're just going to be unhappy. And it's, yeah, if that's you, it's probably not the right solution to work in that way.
yeah, well, it's probably the most exciting time to be in tech, so you have to sort of enjoy it. But here's a question in terms of confidence and the imposter syndrome, because a lot of high achieving women tend to hold themselves back as a result of that, both at the education level as well as at the job level. And so I guess two-part question: how do you kind of realize that you have imposter syndrome? And the second part is, how do you give yourself the confidence to overcome that and pursue and put yourself out there? Who wants to take that one?
I can start. I mean, oh, that's all right. Yeah, and then it's, you know, I'm still guilty of that at times, even though I've been working almost 20 years. And I mean, at least at this point, you know, how do you recognize it? I hear the voice in my head start telling me like, oh, you don't know well enough, or you shouldn't speak up about this, or what are you doing in this room? The good part of it is that I notice it right away when it's happening, because I'm practiced in it, I suppose. You know, kind of the self-talk I do when it starts to happen is, you know, one, if you're in a room, you belong in that room, or if you're in a meeting or conversation, you're there for a reason. So kind of erase that from your mind when it starts to happen. And then also recognizing, you know, don't overanalyze things too much. Don't get caught up in it, I think, is kind of another behavior. And you can get lost in your own, you know, what if I say this and then they're going to say that, or I may not be right. Nobody else is sitting there over critiquing and over analyzing your own words, your own thoughts like you are. And so just put stuff out there. And, you know, if it doesn't go well, or something was the wrong thing to say, there's a new day tomorrow, right? There's a new something tomorrow. None of it is that catastrophic. So it's a lot of, I think, kind of self-talk and recognizing when it's starting to happen, and then checking yourself on it, that you belong there for a reason.
Yeah, I would add that it's imposter syndrome. To me, it's just self-doubt. It's like an extreme version of self-doubt, but everybody has it. It's not just women, it's everyone. And even when you're the CEO of a company, you can have imposter syndrome. So you're not alone. And this is something that every day, you know, everybody struggles with at some given point in their career. The way that I deal with it is I talk to other people. I find that, as Tamara said, you get into your own head and you're your own worst critic, but the people around you, especially people who you absolutely value and trust, they know you, and they know you to your core. When you talk to them, they're a good sounding board. It's amazing. You know, sometimes when I talk to my brother, or I talk to a close friend, they're not even in the problem, but they see it very clearly, because they're not, you know, they're not biased and kind of, they understand what you're going through, and they can give you a much more clear perspective. And I find that tends to help me get out of my own head and say, hey, you know what? You're right. It's actually not as, you know, murky and you know, the world's coming to an end as I thought. Like, it's actually I'm okay. It's going to be fine, and I can do this. So I think that having a third party sounding board is really important. The second thing is just to continually give yourself the right to feel like you're worth it and you're valuable. I think a lot of times we don't do that, and sometimes it's subconscious and sometimes it is more explicit. But like a simple example is I feel like, you know, sometimes when women come to a room for a meeting, a lot of times they'll take the back seat, or they sit on the side, or they're even just standing, and they won't take a seat at the table. And you're already sending a signal to that room that you're not as important as everyone else by standing in the back or just sitting on the side. Take a seat at the table, right? Show that you're here, and if you've been invited to the meeting, that means you have value to give, and you know, and don't be afraid to speak up and contribute.
Well, thanks. Rahul, did you want to add anything to that? I mean, we have some people here who are talking a little bit about, somebody asked about possibly the neurological aspect, and, you know, is it, you know, something that women are born with in terms of the confidence gap? So, and then we have another person who's asked here, are we pushing women up a broken ladder rather than fixing a broken system? Which is sort of interesting. Rahul, did you want to make a point there?
Sure. Yeah, that resonates with me. As I said, I like to work on the infrastructure and sort of the context thing. That's something I'm passionate about in terms of like of empowerment for people as they come into places. I mean, Helen and Tamra sort of addressed that, I think, wonderfully in terms of ways to think about imposter syndrome. When we think about culture within organizations, I think I go back to these sort of two approaches, right? Is one is me as an individual actor, that I'm in the dominant, sure, I'm a sort of a person of color, but in technology, I am not an underrepresented minority. There's not a lack of Indian men here. I'm in the club. So I'm in a position to do something about it. So I can take individual steps, like intervening, like, you know, if I'm at a talk and there's a man and the woman both presenting, I can make sure I thank them both instead of just thanking the man. You know, there's like simple, obvious things. Then there's also the structural changes, fixing the ladder, right? So there's individual steps, but there's also structural changes around fixing the broken ladder. And those, I think, are ones that are much harder because there's institutional momentum. And in places and organizations that I've worked with, that is one of the harder things to work on, is shifting things. And, you know, especially since this is hard to do, which means to me, like, I've seen a lot of examples of people that come in with good intentions that give advice that's received poorly, that triggers a defensive response. So we don't have like a magic bullet to say like, oh, just follow this guide to fix your company culture. There's a lot of people that are offering to come in, and even if you're well-intentioned, are suggesting things that cause a backlash. And you want to make sure you avoid backlash effects when you're trying to change culture. So it's hard because it's hard, not because we're bad at it. And it's one of the things that I try to focus on when I'm working on shifting culture is trying to look at the things that are going well and doubling down on them. Mm-hmm. Right. So don't go in there with accusations or pointing out problems. Start from a point of common ground where, and this builds on a lot of psychology research from individual and other such discussions and changing minds. You start on something that's agreed upon and working well, and then you build on top of that. And then you have a better chance of succeeding in terms of changing cultures.
So we're kind of running out of time, but, you know, we have one person here who asked, an anonymous attendee asked a question, which I think is sort of funny, which I want to address towards the women here. And, you know, this person said that, you know, they were told that they were too aggressive. And it's funny because early on in my career, I used to be very like apologetic and whatever, you know, now it's like, I just want to get the job done. And it's like, I try to be nice, but I'm more focused on getting stuff done. So I'm told that I'm aggressive, intimidating, and I think it's kind of funny. And I used to be very sarcastic. So when I used to get those comments about, if somebody made a comment to me about like, oh, well, I don't need your help because it's too technical, I'd be like, what are you talking about? But I had such a sarcastic immediate response that one of my male counterparts told me that it was like a harpoon. I would just like quickly come back at it. So I've toned it down a little bit, but I'd be interested in hearing the women's take on, you know, on that. Because I think it's interesting that very successful women often are accused of being too aggressive.
Yeah, it's Cheryl's, Cheryl Sandberg, our COO, talks about the word bossy being used for women than for men. It's very true. I think Raul's right. There are tactical things that do matter. Words matter. Yeah. What you do, how you do it matters. So I think being cognizant of it is important. I think I've definitely been called aggressive in my career. I remember a specific review where they were debating me, and they said, she's so great at building relationships, but I think she's a little bit too aggressive and too assertive, and maybe it's going to scare off our clients. And for me, I think, the partner that was advocating for me, she stopped the room and she said, would we even have this conversation if she was a man? And it just shut up everybody. And I think finding, allies, the people that can champion those thoughts are really important. But don't be afraid to be yourself. When you bring your true, authentic self to the world, that will show through. I think the other tactical piece that I've learned, and this was advice that someone had given me pretty recently, actually, is that there is this cognitive dissonance because women are expected to behave a certain way. So if you behave more like a man, then they kind of can't deal with it. And so one of the tricks that I use now is before I say something that could appear more masculine, I prime them. So I say, hey, this may come off maybe a little bit aggressive to you, or whatever word you want to use. But the reason why I want to say this is because X, Y, and Z. And then I say it. And then it tends to actually make them take the message a little better because I've called it out and I've sort of eased them into that conversation.
Tamara, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, same. I've been told I was too aggressive, too robotic, not enough emotion, all those things. And it was probably within a year or two of working that I first was getting that feedback. For me, it was the, establishing relationships with people, especially if you knew you're going to be in a working relationship for a long time or on a, either on a team with them or interfacing with their team, taking the time to do that. So that when you have to pick up the phone or whatever, go over there and I need this tomorrow, then they're responsive to it in a positive way because you have that relationship and it's not just you being commanding. But yeah, the fact is, I think that a woman can act away, and if a man were doing the same thing, the woman's labeled as aggressive and the guy wouldn't be. So at least right now, until that changes, that's a way to handle it, I think.
Yeah. Well, we're coming close to our timeline. We have all these great questions. We did touch on a lot of these in terms of pivots and education, imposter syndrome, different sort of work styles and sort of pivoting. And I wish we could answer all of the questions. There was one here in terms of boards. How do you get on boards? I think it's all about building relationships and getting respect. I wanted to leave people with one thought because when I mentor people, I always say this one thing, and that when you're in an environment, in a job, there's 3 questions you should be asking your boss. One is, what does success look like? Define it for me. And what is my role in the success of the company? But what is, how are you defining success? How are you going to measure my role? And then how are you going to reward me for it? And I think those are 3 questions that aren't that intimidating, but oftentimes there are bosses who can't even answer those questions for you. But that's a very telling, those are 3 telling questions because, for all intents and purposes, your success within an organization is going to be based upon how those responses are formulated. And so I highly suggest people use that in their environments, have a better understanding of what it is they could be doing and focusing more on that because you can use your success as a defense when people say you're aggressive or whatever the feedback there is. Did you guys want to make any sort of other final points before we conclude our session here? Any other thoughts? Well, I think there's some housekeeping. Oh, wait, what were you saying?
No, I just thank you for all the folks joining us today. I think it's an important topic and it's exciting to see MIT paying attention to it and then also people engaging in the wider audience. So thank you.
Good point there. And we have a little housekeeping here. So there's an attached to the email survey, there's like a list of resources around the conversation. And if you didn't get the email, you should email alumnicareers@mit.edu. And once again, this is very exciting. And I know a lot of you were, a couple of you had mentioned, how often these are done. I know that there was some mention of an event happening in the spring. I would suggest you follow up with that and have an opportunity to meet people face to face and have these discussions. But thank you all for participating, both as speakers as well as the audience. It was very exciting.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christina.
And thank you, Erin. Erin, do you have any final thoughts? No, I guess not. All right. Oh, there you are.
No, just thank you so much to our panel, and thanks for everyone, all our alumni tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you.